how can the press operate otherwise? But of course, they will, some papers are allowed certain leeway by the owners, and so they operate, almost like as if they are free but on occasions like the general election, they all have to toe the line. They all have to work for the component parties of the Barisan Nasional. So how can you change? So states like Penang, states like Perak, Selangor, they will have a problem. But I think the media too, they will act slightly independent, and of course they wait for instructions. So they will try to provide news about report whatever happens in the other state. And but what the state can do is they can produce their own organ, their own newspapers. Like in Kelantan, they used to have a paper called Akhbar Kota Baru or Akhbar Kelantan, something like that. I don't know whether the state will go to this, but maybe in Parliament they can fight to amend the laws that govern the working of the press. Otherwise it's difficult.
My name is Sagat Singh. I come from Party in Malaysia. Just for information, we are the 23rd political party registered to make a stake. The Sikh community consists of about 120,000 Sikhs spread all over the country, about 120 gurudwaras where most of the politics takes place. We have been marginalized by our own Indian community, and you know which party I am talking about. The law of consensus. Every time we are trying to be members of the Barisan, we have been elected.
You need to raise the question.
I'm leading to the question
I don't see that too long.
Sir, do we still need the consensus to make the improvements in any government that is coming along? Thank you. Give the chance. The only party that gave 30 Indians is the DAP. Yarakan didn't even put one. I'd like to know how the relevance of these so-called multi-purpose parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
My name is Lim Hong Kai, and I am a academic. As I believe the non-Malay voters can only do very limited damage to the BN because of the ecosystem. My question is really, the puzzle for me is how come there is such a significant housing, we don't know, quite significant shift in the Malay vote against the BN. Yes, but in the past. So I really wonder why, what caused that, since the last shift of the Malay vote away from BN. And don't tell me it is corruption, because corruption has been there for quite a while, and it didn't seem to make much of a difference before. So that's my question. What do you think?
Thank you. Except corruption got worse. I am working for Malaysia Management Corporation. I have just one question to ask our lawyers here. Why is it in Malaysia we have this unfair weightage between rural and urban groups? Why is it we have some parties which have very few voters for a constituency or parliament seat, whereas some parliamentary seats have like 105,000 voters in Kapa, as against Putrajaya? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe the lady and then we wind up for the family.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Cindy. Oh, all right. I just want to say this. I think the people have voted, right? And I think there is a lot of ownership about the results of the 12th general election. I read in Malaysian TV a lot of comments on how and what the new leaders, the pluralistic leaders can do. My question is, how can we the people who have voted for change formalize a channel of consultation, communication with the new leaders? It can also involve Barisan Nasional. I like the point that we shouldn't look at them as villains. Alright? How do we formalize this that the people, as you can see, the huge crowd here today, we want to stay involved We want to see real change happen to the country. We want to stop thinking about migrating. Thank you. And sorry, coming from today's dialogue, would what has been discussed here, would the questions of the floor be put formally to the various leaders? Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 4 more, and we've got several questions not answered. We will open it to panel. But I hope the line is not lengthening. I thought I saw 2, now we've got 4. That's fine. Yeah. I think here the re-election.
I'm going to try and do all the questions that were asked of me and a few others together. Okay, so the first thing is I think we have to understand, speaking as a tactician now, there are tactical opportunities. Because where do we stand? We have a Barisan that's been very, very wounded. It's been taught a lesson. It's realizing now, before it regroups, that it ignored the voter base. So what we can imagine now is a situation where the majority of parliament will be responsive to this idea that they cannot now act autonomously in arrogance. So they cannot say we have the mandate, like what Sri Nazri says all the time, you bring 1,000, I'll bring 100,000 and so on and so forth. All that has to stop. Which means now that when they take a position in parliament, they will be realizing that if they take the wrong position, then there will be a further reaction in the next election. Which means they have to now try and appeal to the popular sentiment to shift back support, other than the other tactics that they might be using, from whatever it is. So, if you ask me now, how can the opposition value add in parliament? This is the time. Because the positions that the opposition takes in parliament now will be monitored more closely by all of civil society. And of course the government parties will want to make sure that they exploit that to the best that they can. Now imagine if the opposition were to suggest something quite reasonable, quite constructive, and the Barisan says no. So that's not something they can do now in the way they did 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. So can they value add? I think they can. But they have to be disciplined. The opposition parliamentarians must be disciplined, which means that we cannot expect them to be anywhere else except in parliament when parliament is sitting. If they are not, we need to remind them that they should be sitting there and not going anywhere else. Because that's their opportunity and that's the chance we have. So if we do not take advantage of the opportunity tactically, then I think that's going to be a great loss to us. So I think that's how they can value add. Because with the greater opposition presence, there's going to be a greater debate in Parliament. And I know that quite a few of the opposition candidates are people who, all of us have a lot of respect for. From Siva Rasa to Charles Santiago to a range of other people who are articulate enough to understand that they should go beyond the politics of the moment and start addressing issues of governance. Now, I find it very difficult to see a situation where the Barisan MPs, if they are mindful of the fact that they might even lose the country next round, will not engage as they should. But media, of course, plays an important role. If there's inadequate monitoring, there's going to be not enough dissemination of information. Now, up to this point, we've seen stuff from Parliament, the border stuff on YouTube and other places. But of course, it has to go further than that. So media does play an important role. How does this work? Now, I'm wondering, maybe I'm fantasizing a little bit, and I'm trying to address Dane's question now. What if the government of Penang applied for a KDN permit for a printing press? And what if the government of Penang set up a printing press as a public enterprise, the way they've done with the Penang Water Board management? Now, I'd like to see the ministry reject that application. I'd like to see the ministry deal with the fallout from a rejection of that application when the government of the state of this country is trying to say we need a paper to disseminate important information about the state to our citizens. But they have to play it tactically. So let the government of Penang and Perak and whatever it is put in their applications for printing presses. Let them set up public enterprises to run these presses. Of course, for the government, the Barisan as if they win back the state, will take the newspaper as well. But the next government could take that newspaper as well. I think that's an idea that we might have to explore. So what I think is important here is the fact that there has been a mindset shift. Somebody said ownership. I think that's very true. Malaysians are beginning to act like stakeholders. For the last 4 years, I've been going blue in the face with friends of mine, saying that when are you going to start acting like you actually own a piece of this country? Now, what can you do as individual citizens? There are a lot of initiatives that are being discussed right now. The